This is my short story, Can't Forget What You Don't Know, which was first published by the Last Girls Club last winter in their special issue, Secret Police, Ice, and Desperate Times. Can't forget what you don't know. He blinked against the dingy streetlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. Beside him, Annie snored softly, undisturbed, curled away from him with all but 6 inches of the covers. He tried to swallow, but his throat was so dry he nearly choked on his tongue, his heart banging frenetically against his breastbone. Even with the light in his eyes, he could make out the silhouette standing at the end of the bed, a black abyss, shaped like a woman. Vainly he pushed against the mattress, damp with his sweat, but like every other night she appeared. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. It's only a dream, he told himself. A nightmare, nothing more. Wake up, Dan, wake up. But he didn't wake. He moaned with terror as her soft laugh drifted across his body. Oh, hell. It wasn't as if he didn't know who she was. He knew, all right. But every other night she'd come to him weeping, the same helpless, hiccuping sobs he'd heard months ago, when she pleaded with him in Spanish and broken English not to separate her from her daughter. He didn't make the rules. He just enforced them, showed up and did his job and went home. If people wanted to change the rules, there was a process for that. Just like he tried to explain to this woman, there was a process for asylum, a process for reuniting with her daughter, a process for crossing a border, a process for protection. She'd clung to his arm, and he could still feel the silk of her black braid in his hand as he pulled her off. When the dark figure appeared at the foot of his bed a few months later, crying as if her heart would break, he'd known immediately it was her. He made it a practice never to look back. Too many good guys cracked up that way. Every border had its mote of the dead, the desperate and the terrified who'd been turned away and died exactly the way they feared, of starvation, of sickness, at the hands of some cartel or some government or some priest. Dan pitied them, of course, but he couldn't help them. He didn't make the decisions about whose case was legitimate and whose was turned away. Checking up on any of them, trying to track what became of them once they were out of his reach, was what drove men mad. People weren't made to carry that kind of guilt. So Dan hadn't known what became of her, or the dirty little girl who clutched her mother's hand. When she showed up crying night after night, he hadn't needed anyone to tell him what was what. She'd been sent home, and she hadn't made it. Maybe she'd died on the way back. Maybe she'd been killed by whoever it was she was afraid of. Maybe this damn virus had taken her. She still wanted the same thing she wanted from him then. She wanted her baby. And Dan was as helpless now as he was then. She only came at night, but Dan found himself looking for her in every shadow. What began as hypervigilance spiraled into paranoia. He woke with a jerk every few minutes when he did sleep, straining his eyes for her until she appeared. His cheeks hollowed, his eyes reddened, his temper snapped and sparked without warning. Annie avoided him. Even the cat fled at his tread. He could feel her under his skin. He wished it was insanity, but she didn't even allow him that refuge. Every morning, when he woke, he stumbled hastily into the bathroom to find long, silken black hairs sprouting from his body. They might be anywhere, on his shaved head, his arm, his chest, his back, his leg. They clung to him, wound round his limbs. He pulled them out, gritting his teeth against the sting, but they always came back. By the end of the day, he'd have yanked out 10 or 20. He went to the bathroom constantly, checking himself in the mirror, desperate to keep Annie or anyone else from discovering what he was becoming. The ghost wasn't crying anymore, though. She wasn't pleading. She was laughing. That couldn't possibly be good. Unhealthy or not, Dan had to know why. When the words appeared on the station computer later that day, Dan shoved his fist against his mouth, fighting to keep the tears inside. Influenza. A terribly common death for a little girl with a terribly common name. Dread flooded him, mingled with something weirdly like relief. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. He had to go to the bathroom every hour now, tugging not at 1 or 2 strands, but locks of hair, leaving patches of bloody skin behind. Thank God Annie had a late shift at the clinic. He stopped by the liquor store at the way home, splurged on the good rye. Annie tiptoed through the door later that night, closing the door softly behind her in hopes she could slip into bed without rousing her unpredictable husband from his restless sleep. When she caught sight of the rocking chair, though, she screamed and screamed and screamed. Her husband's sock feet were all that emerged from the tangled masses of thick black hair, vining tightly around his arms and legs and throat, covering his face, filling his open mouth, binding his eyes shut. A nearly empty bottle of whiskey sat beside a spilled glass on the end table. A long, fat rope of hair spelled out a name on the carpet at his still feet. Maria. I'll put the link for the Last Girls Club down below, their website. You can check out their issue of Secret Police, Ice, and Desperate Times, as well as their latest issue. Thank you so much for listening.